Hello everybody and welcome to another video here at Rudy's Spot. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about debugging, about how to debug a program that you are working on. And I think this is a very important topic to go over because I have met a lot of people in the industry, a lot of very successful TDs that are able to do a lot of really good work who are still not familiar with the debugging tools or how to use a debugger at all. Like they're very used to just go into the code and type in little print statements wherever they need their information. And, it's amazing how much you can actually get done by just doing that, right? Like actually I used that for many, many years until eventually you get to a point where you're trying to debug problems that are a little bit more complicated. You have variables that are changing values as the program is executing, and it just becomes kind of hard to try to figure out what's going on by just using print statements. So what we do is we use what's called as a debugger. It's something that allows you to halt the execution of your program at the right moment so that you can inspect and see what on earth is going on, right? What's going on under the hood. So there's different levels of debugging, I like to call it, for Python. Level number one is going to be using the standard PDB debugger, which is the standard Python debugger that ships with the application. And that one, it's very easy, right? It's very straightforward, but it's kind of limiting. I mean, it's not as user-friendly as maybe other ones. Let's go ahead and do a quick little example so you guys can see, and then we'll move over to the other ones. So I have a little script here. You can see here on the left, and now these are very kind of useless scripts I just put together for this little demonstration. But we actually just want to look at the debugging part. So this is going to work for now. So for example, I have this line right here, and over here I have a little bit of code that basically just loads the code from the location where I am and makes sure that I can import that by adding that into the path. Very standard Python stuff. So here you guys can see I'm going to make my calls, and then something's going to happen. So let me make sure that I save this and then come back over here, and then we're going to give this a quick execution, right? So right now, as you can see, it basically selected two random meshes, and then it assigned a random color, and then it applied some jittering on the y-axis. Well, it didn't quite because I had this set to 0. But let's give this a 40, and let's give the random number a 3, right? So if I execute that, you'll see some objects are moving up and down, and some materials are being created and assigned. So let's go ahead and look at how we can debug this, right? Like I said, we're going to start with the standard Python debugger that is called PDB. This is very straightforward to use, and it comes included with Python, so there's nothing additional that you need to do. You can just start debugging right away. So if we go over here, all I have to do to use the debugger, well, let's go ahead and create a problem for ourselves, right? Because we were able to execute this and it worked fine. So let's pretend that a developer or you, while you're doing things, maybe you included here some kind of statement that made the application, the function, return ahead of time without returning the expected output list, right? So if you do that, chances are the whole application or the whole function is gonna, break because you're not gonna have a return value, right? So if I go over here and let me give this a save, very important, and then if I reload this, we're gonna see some errors. You see this all went red, and if we expand this a little bit, we're gonna be able to see that it tells us some information, right? Non-type is non-iterable. So it tells you where it's happening, line 17 of simple test. And this might be a very easy bug to fix right now, but what we're trying to demonstrate is how to use a PDB. So basically all I do is go into around line 17, which is let's see, assign random color, that is going to be right here. And as you start tracking down, you can see basically that here's where it's been evaluated. So there's something probably wrong with select random meshes. So I can go here, and you guys can pretend that this is a big function, right? It's a lot of code everywhere, so it's not as easy probably to know exactly what's going on. So in here, we're just going to type import PDB, And then, oops, and then we're just going to go ahead and do pdb.setTrace, which is going to tell the debugger to basically halt the execution of this program at this moment. So if we go ahead and give this a save, and we go back here and execute this thing, you're going to see that the execution stops right there at that line. You can see here it reads all meshes, and that's the line right after the import statement that I created, all meshes. And we're going to get this Python stand-in input. And this is something that just Maya displays. Other applications like Houdini might handle this in a different way, but this is how Maya handles whenever it finds a PDB, and all it's waiting for you is for some input that you can provide. Here, for example, let's see if you can do help, see if it prints. Right, yeah, so if you hit help, it's going to print the different commands that you can use for your debugger. I know basically how to step forward and how to look at some of the data that I have, because that's really all I really need right now. We could go into a lot more detail, but this is basically just an overview. So here I can type W, and it's going to tell me where I am. So it tells me right there that I'm in my console line 11, so it's probably down here where that thing kicked in. And then I can also continue. Right here it tells me that it's actually referencing simple test line 9, which is right here. So I can do, for example, N to move to the next line, and then we can see that now it's on line 10. So here I can type all meshes to see what's going on. I can see, oh, well, there's definitely values in there. You know, I can see a bunch of spheres have been selected. One of the things that PDB has, it has pretty print embedded, so you can just do pp and then give it the value that you're trying to visualize. So all meshes, and then it prints it, you know, not in a single line, but a little bit prettier, so it's easier to see. You can keep hitting N to keep moving forward, you know, and then eventually you're going to get to this range, you know, for loop, which is going to force it to do the same. So at any point you're ready to do to carry on, you should be able to just hit C to continue, and then it's going to carry on and eventually fail, right? So in this particular place, we were not able to see exactly why it failed, right? We would probably eventually have to take this over, and we see that it's failing on line 18, so we move it over here to line 18. And if we save this and run it again, right, we say, okay, obj list. What's in here? Oh, it's none. You can actually do type obj list, and it'll tell you that it's a none type. So this would allow you to go ahead and find what you're trying to, you know, what the problem might be. By hitting Q, you can just quit the debugger, and it will just pretty much error out. So that was pretty straightforward, as you guys can see, just a single line that we had to add into our code, and we were able to, you know, stop the execution and look a little bit into our data. But like I said, that to me is level 1. It's the simplest way of debugging that you can do, and there's plenty of other ways to look at your data and make sure that you have the information that you need. You know, you can track things a little bit better. The next step up would be to use something that is kind of halfway between using a terminal and using a user interface, right? For this, we would use a module called PUDB, and I'm going to have to install that because that does not ship with Python. So if you guys bear with me, I'm going to go through the process of installing that. And this is one that, for example, if we use this, Maya doesn't really know how to deal with this one directly. So it's not as good for debugging things inside of Maya, but if you're trying to debug something that is a command line tool where you're just working in the terminal, or in another tool that knows how to interact with this a little bit better, you know, maybe Houdini does, I don't know, but you should be able to use this, and it's a little bit nicer. So let me go ahead here and change to the desktop, and I'm gonna make this guy a little bit bigger, right? Let's go ahead and give this a clear, and I'm in the same location where these two files are over here. You guys can see I have, you know, simple test and terminal test. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use virtual environment and then create a virtual environment here. Now, what is virtual environment? Virtual environment is a quick Python tool that allows you to create what the name says, an environment that is self-contained inside a folder. Like in this case, it's going to be the folder env inside of the folder debugging. And in there, you'll be able to install whatever Python packages you need really quick without worrying that you're going to be, polluting your machine, all the global system environment for Python. So it's very convenient if you're trying things out. Sometimes it's very convenient to be able to package things together. So that's why I like to use it. So if we go back into our desktop, you can see here that it's done, and it only took about a second. Then what you have to do is activate this environment by typing source env bin activate. And you can see here that now it lets us know that we have an environment active. So with this there, we can go ahead now and try to install PUDB. So we're going to go pip install PUDB, and it's going to go and collect it and install it, and right, it's all good. Like I said, this is not something that Maya supports. So for this purpose, I'm going to now move and use my terminal test, which is this one right here. And for this one, all I'm doing is I'm reading the content of my debugging.ma file, and then I just created, some code here and there. Let me get rid of this line because we're not doing that quite yet. I'm just doing a little bit of code, right? It's extremely simple. I'm just trying to show, basically how you would go about stopping the execution and how it would look. So if you were doing the terminal and just like before, you do import pdb set trace and save this. Here I should be able to do Python terminal test and hit enter, and you can see that PDB, and this was the original one we were using before, stops at that point and gives you the control to the terminal. Here I can type help and I get the full help document. So this is the same thing that Maya was doing, and whenever it gave you that tiny little window in Maya, you were getting this tiny little window that say Python standard input. It's basically this line here in the shell. So it's just asking for you to give it information. So just like before, I can type W and it's going to tell me where I am. I can do N for next, and at any point I can do, let's do line parts. It tells me that line parts. I can do PP for pretty print, and that actually it's very pretty, so it just does it that way. So this is just PDB, right? I can just do C to continue, and it's gonna continue because, as you guys can see here, the debug statement is inside of the for loop. This program is going to just be paused every single line, and I know that this file contains like 1,000 lines, so I'm just going to go ahead and abort it. Right now, I wanted to show you PDB, so I'm going to clear this, and now we're going to look at PUDB, and this one, in my opinion, is the next level up in debugging. So if I run this, let's go ahead and run the Python program. You're going to see it's still in the shell, but it looks a lot more like a little bit more like a graphic user interface, right? You now have something that you don't have to remember a lot of the commands. You should be able to view data a little bit easier. And the shortcuts for this, basically it's N, the same, to move to the next line. But every time I move to the next line, you can see that this panel over here gets updated. And it's going to get updated with the value of the variables as my script is executing. So line parts is going to go in there, and you can see it change. The last part change here, debugging.ma. And then it's going to keep going. And you can see just how it all keeps changing, right? At any point, you can go over here and click on an item, for example, And to go to each one of these panes, you just go left, right, top, down, and you also have a shell that is here below, and to access it you would use Control X, and then you can do, hold on, okay, let's do Control X, and then to print I, for example, you can do that. I didn't like that. Let's why didn't it like that? Print I. Do I have to terminate this? Oh, there is a terminal here and it's giving us a bit of a hard time, but let's go ahead and just get out of here by using Control X and go back into the debugger. So something else you can do is, for example, I'm going to just tell it to continue, and then well, we can always stop it by just hitting Q, and then it stops. I'm going to move this debug line down inside this matching statement, so we're not stopping on every single line. We'll go ahead and we run this again, and then you can see that we are about to assign, we're about to hit line 11, so we're about to assign something to ODIC, which stands for Output Dictionary. It's a variable I use sometimes when I code. So you can see right here it's empty, but as soon as I go into the next line, now it has a value. And then I can continue, and you're going to see that it's going to keep growing. Well, I guess I reached the end of the execution there. So I'm going to run it a couple of times. Oh, I guess only 2. Okay. Now, as I scroll up and down here, you're going to see that here's that variable. I can click on it, and then I can go here and use my mouse, my up and down keys on the keyboard, and select expand it. And that is going to expand it. So now I can see here, because it is a dictionary, I can see the key, which is 11525, and the value that is assigned to that key. And by hitting Q or continue, I can continue the execution and exit. So that to me feels a little bit like the next level in debugging, right? You're not in a pure terminal, you're inside a terminal, but it looks a little bit more like those old banking systems from the 80s. You know, you have to move around with the keys and arrows, but it is a little bit more visual than just standard PDB. Now, that doesn't work with Maya, like I mentioned. So let's go ahead and see what I think is like probably the best way of doing your debugging. And for this, you are going to need to use a couple of things. First, you're going to need to have an IDE that supports a debugging view. Something like Eclipse with PyDev installed in it. I am going to be using LI Clips, which is kind of like an official build of the PyDev project with Eclipse. So it is for Mac, so it is very specifically targeted for that. I think they have a version for Windows and Linux, but anyhow, it's very specific for Python. This technique should also work with PyCharm or any other, like I said, any IDE that supports Python and that supports a debugging view. So if we go in here, I'm going to go back into the screen. You can see here, that's what I'm using. And over here is where we have the debugging view, right? But let's go back here into the screen for a little bit, and let's go back to our simple test bit of code, because that is what we're using here inside of Maya. Let me make this a little bit smaller and reduce this a little bit. Okay, now one of the things, like I mentioned, you are going to need a very specific package to be able to use this, and this package is called PyDevD. So I'm going to go here and type pip install PyDevD, and it's going to go and collect it and install it, right? So now that it is installed, I should be able to go over here, and instead of import PDB, we're going to do import PyDevD. And here's a little trick you might have to do with PyDevD: reload PyDevD, and then finally PyDevD and then set trace. Theirs doesn't have an underscore in it. So if we save this now, and let's go ahead and try to execute it, right, and see what happens. Well, we shouldn't really execute it and see what happens. What we should do is first, we're going to go over here and let's get rid of this because it's usually not going to be there. Terminate remote. Right now, when you are using PDV, PyDBD, this tool, what it's looking for is basically, it's going to use what's known as a server, a debugging server. So you need to start this little bit of code that is constantly listening in a very specific port for information that this module is going to send back into it, right? And this is what allows you to debug applications that are running on a separate environment. You could run, because with an IDE, usually you can write the code inside the IDE and then you can run it from there and you can debug it from there. But there are times, like when you're working with Maya, that the code is not going to be inside of your IDE. I mean, you're typing it in there, but it's going to be evaluated in the Python that is embedded inside of Maya. So it's not really accessible by your IDE except by using some kind of circumvention, which the most common one is to use a server, right? You create this little server that is just constantly listening for information, and then you insert a little bit of code in your script that is going to halt the execution and is going to send data back into the server. So that's basically what we're going to do. And this is very effective because it works with anything, right? You should be able to use this with Houdini, with Blender, with any application that you want to debug, as long as it has Python support. So we're going to go back in here and we're going to try to make this work. The first thing we have to do is start our server. And in Eclipse, or in this thing called Lightclipse, it's going to be all the way up here in these buttons, or you can just go here on PyDeb and do start debug server. Right? So you're going to see it kicks in there. We have our line of code right here, line 17. And now if I go ahead and run this guy, you're going to see things are starting to happen here. Now, I hope it's not too small for the screen. Oh, I hope I can make this bigger. Anyhow, one of the cool things about this is that you can go here, right? And you have several controls. Like, for example, this one is the one that allows you to go to the next line, right? And in there, as soon as I ran that, it pretty much broke, right? We have a very big bug that happened right away. So we're going to go ahead and run this to the end. And we're gonna stop our server, right? Giving us control back to Maya. Sorry, I dragged this out of the way. Let's put it back in there. So just to demonstrate, I'm going to move this line a little bit from here. I'm going to take it from there. Let's put it right here. And then let's put one right here. So now, if I start this again, right, we have our exporter here, and we can see we have stopped right now. Let's see. The main thread has stopped right here on line 9. And if we go in here, we can see that there's a count parameter that was passed in, right? You can see it right there. And that is shown right here. And it's telling you that it's an integer with a value of 3, right? And if you step over by clicking on this button, then you can see that all meshes now suddenly shows up. And if you expand it, you're going to see that it has, on index 0, it has a Unicode psphere1, and you can just examine all of your data, right? So hopefully you guys are able to see how much easier it is to be able to debug something, especially if it's something that has a lot of code that is changing, dynamically, the value of variables. So to me, this is the highest level of debugging. Like, it's the most efficient way of finding something, because you will, no matter how good a coder you are going to make errors, and you're going to have times where you're going to want to almost rip your hair out. And knowing your debugger is going to help you big time. So this is pretty much what the system that I like to use the most, right? And this should work with PyCharm or any other debugger. And yeah, so basically you can continue going here, and it's gonna just keep moving, and it's gonna continue executing, right? And you can always go down here and see choice, how it's changing. You know, right now it has a single value, and then output list, you can make this bigger, and you can see that you have a couple of Unicodes, and it has a length of 2. Right? You can also do step return, which is going to make it continue. It looked like it canceled there really quick. So let's go ahead and stop it. And here's where you would go and get rid of this guy. Let's go ahead and stop it again. Let's get rid of this. Right, and now we're going to just go ahead and look at what's going on here, because you know, if we were running this big system, we know that the error is here because that's what the terminal is telling us, that it's on line 19 right there. So we're going to go ahead and run this again, and hopefully it's going to stop. And then what we're going to see here, that the arguments that are being passed. Sorry, let's go back here into the main thread. Right there. So as you can see here, object list has a value of none. So basically, if you were debugging, you would you could always, you know, stop this, but you would be able to see, okay, this here has a value of none because that is a parameter that was being passed over here. So if this is none, you just go up one line and you look at this like, oh, okay, so select random meshes must be broken or something, and that's where you would go back here and realize, oh, I didn't add this thing here. And then by just going here and executing this again, right, you can go here and find the location, and now you can see object list. Oh, object list now has 3 values, and you know, problem solved, your bug has been killed, and you are able to continue with your day and do awesome work. So let me go ahead and get rid of this line because I don't want this there. And that is it. So that's it pretty much, guys. There's 3 different levels of debugging. The easiest one is just doing straight up PDB that ships with vanilla Python. Very simple, very quick to get, you know, to be able to stop execution and figure out what's going on. But it's probably not the best way if you're dealing with a big system where things are changing a lot. The next level up is PUDB, which is a module that you're gonna have to download. It's a little bit better. If you have a big screen monitor, it's pretty cool. You get to see a lot of elements here on the left list, but you still have to remember a lot of shortcuts and just how to use the application, right? Still it's a terminal based application, so it's all about your keyboard and knowing the keystrokes that you need to use. And then the highest level is to use something like an integrated debugger into an IDE. My favorite at the moment is PyDVD, mainly because it connects to Eclipse. I know that it also connects to PyCharm or any other Python editor that has a debugging view. So that is it for now. I hope you guys found this useful, and hopefully you guys will be able to start debugging your own scripts this way, and you know, become more productive, get more work done, save the day. That is it. Thank you so much, guys. If you like this video, please go ahead and subscribe, share it, you know, send me your thoughts, and I'll just keep making them for you guys. Thank you so much. Bye bye.